Welcome to the Legendary Leadership Summit 2019 with Cody, Dakota, Wooten.
So this is the official start of the Legendary Leadership Summit. I'm the host for today, Cody, Dakota, Wooten. I am what I call a heroic potential and legendary leadership coach, speaker, teacher, podcast host, TV host, and all this sort of fun stuff today, and talking about what does it take to be a legendary leader. Right now with us, we have Kenneth Bader, who is the founder of Bader Training and Consulting. He's got 15 years of experience, 15 years helping corporations create environments where employees actually want to come to work. That's a really difficult one because, like, I've been in the corporate world and I'll be honest, I didn't want to go to work most days. So, like, that is hard to get people to want to do. Kenneth, that is something that you help people and organizations do. You're a facilitator for training and strategic planning sessions. You're an expert in brand concept, culture building, and management. Oh my gosh, you've got so much going on, Ken. It is great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. That bio sounds so good. I want to call this guy and talk to him and find out what the heck he knows.
Well, hey, I've got his number, so if you need to get a hold of him, I'll be the first one to connect you.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people have my number, as my friends in Chicago would say. But thank you for having me on this program, and I'm honored to be leading it off today. Thank you so much, Cody.
No, I'm honored to have you with us today. I'm super excited because you're going to be talking about something that I don't think a lot of people necessarily understand, and so we're going to be diving into it, why it's important, and really taking off with that concept. So, what is it that you wanted to talk about today, Ken?
Well, we're going to talk about service standards, which I think is probably the number one tool for elite leadership. In fact, a lot of times, people will come to me and say, I don't have time to read your book, and I don't know if I'll ever hire you for training or facilitating or what have you because of budgets or whatever. Can you give me one tip, just one thing that's going to help me to do things better than my competitors? And I always tell them, institute service standards and adhere to them like there's no tomorrow. And if you could do that, that will help you to be at the very little bit of everybody else.
Absolutely. So what are service standards? Let's start there, because I like when I would hear service standards, typically I wouldn't think that's the first thing that I need to be thinking of as an elite leader. So tell us, what are service standards?
Yeah, I'll give you the short answer and then the more complex answer. The short answer is it's simply the how we're going to live our brand every day. And to give you a little bit more background of what I'm speaking of is I'll show you from both my show, Branding the Experience, and this is also in my book, The Formula for Business Success Equals B plus C plus S, is I use an analogy of an iceberg, because when we talk about brand, culture, and strategy, there's so many components to this. And eventually, I came up with this iceberg idea, not because I'm the smartest guy in the world, but, I'm the guy that struggled to get the B plus in college, and studied for hours and hours, and other people, studied for 5 seconds and got an A. But I could understand why other people couldn't understand, and I needed to put all of these things together in my head. So, I was thinking, all right, we've got, our history, we've got mission statements, vision statements, values, how do all these things fit together? And in my mind, I came up with the idea that, the history of where our business has been is the when. The mission is the why we're in business. I think that almost all, if not all, the leaders that are part of this conference can understand that. The vision is the where we're going. We've talked a lot about visions in so many different venues. the values, and we talk a lot about values, even, my good friend and colleague, Sean Douglas on Transformation Radio talks a lot about core values. And I think that that's important. Big shout out to Sean. He does a great job. But I think service standards allow us to go one more step than the values. The values are the who we are. And it's great to say that we value, say, respect. But as you talked about in corporate life, we toss that up on a wall and we say, all right, well, we value respect. But what in the heck does respect mean? To one person, it might be actually listening to their coworkers, not interrupting them, trusting their ideas. Where to somebody else, respect might be respect for the job, meaning, I'm supposed to work 9 to 5. At 8:59, I'll be there. And at 5:01, I better have my coat on and get out of here. Now, if you have those two different definitions or ideas of respect, you're going to have a problem in your culture because you're going to have some loggerheads going on.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
I was going to say you're talking about expectations here, right? Mm-hmm. If one person has one set of expectations and another person has another set of expectations and they're different, you're not going to end up on the same page. And the thing about leadership is you got to get everyone on the same page.
Absolutely. And service standards helps you to do that because that's the how we're going to live our brand. So going back to my example of respect, what service standards will do is actually define respect. So a service standard might be something like, we will respect one another as employees by listening and respecting their ideas, or something to that effect. Now what that says to people is it has nothing about timing. It has nothing about doing my job properly. It has to do with actually trusting and listening and being able to treat other people like a professional. I get that. It helps to define exactly what the how is, so you don't have people like this. You mentioned creating an environment where people actually want to come to work. You don't want people coming in like this.
No, definitely not. And the sad thing is that a large population of the world right now is like that. It's almost scary how large of the population is like that.
Yeah. And I will say things are a little bit better, especially during the Great Recession. Things were really bad. I think that a lot of businesses and management, some had the idea of, hey, just be happy that you have a job in this environment. And then many others, I think that there are a lot of leaders out there that want to do the right thing. But sometimes they're so busy doing 15 different things that even though they have the desire to mentor and actually lead rather than manage, I think they get lost in the shuffle and they don't necessarily have the capacity either from a time-wise or emotionally to do those types of things on a regular basis.
Definitely. And I would also add into that there are a lot of people who are leaders right now who've never been shown the ropes. They're kind of just thrown to the wolves and say, hey, go at it. Hope you do well. And it's, that as someone who wants to do something fantastic, as someone who wants to be an elite leader, that's a tough situation to be in. And that's why they got to seek out information, seek out people like you who are talking about what are the steps to actually go from just wanting to be an elite to becoming the elite leader.
Right. And I was fortunate, I was taught this service standard concept, very early on in my career, and I saw how valuable it was. But you're right. I think there are a lot of people out there with a lot of leadership capacity, but they don't know exactly some of the tools that they could use, some of them that cost them nothing to really go from engagement to involvement in their cultures.
Absolutely. So we've talked about what are service standards. Now, tell me about the transition from what they are to how are they actually created? How do you go about actually making them a reality?
That is an awesome question, and one I get a lot. As a side note, I wrote an article on this. Happy to share it with anybody that would like it. So you can give me your information later, and it's out there. I'll share it for free. But what I suggest is to create service standards from the bottom of the org chart up. I often use the phrase of service standards are too important to just be created by management. So what I suggest that I even, with some of the clients that I work with, I give them a worksheet and work them through this, is if you have core values, plan out, or better yet, write out the core values and write down exactly how are we going to live each core value. I gave the example of respect. Let's use the example of timeliness. So we have a core value of timeliness. I want all of the front lines, and not just the customer-facing folks, but also the people internally that are serving internal customers like IT, accounting. Everybody needs to be involved in this. But everybody on that base rung, I shouldn't say the bottom, that base rung that really creates the foundation of the org chart, have them do this exercise. If you have a large organization, get them into teams and have cross-functional teams. Have somebody from accounting, IT, customer service, and so forth, one of each to be in there to go through this exercise. And going back to the example of timeliness, actually defining what timeliness means. That may come out to be a service standard of we will be at our desk or at our station no later than 15 minutes before our start time. Just an example, but that is clear then. Yeah, that becomes, not a, well, what does timeliness really mean? Yeah, that becomes a clear directive of this is how we're going to live our standards. And if it's being created from the base of the org chart, now it's not just something else that's being pushed down by management. Now you're beginning to get buy-in. It's like, hey, the CEO and the board aren't creating this. You're creating this. Now, granted, I always tell some scared CEOs or business owners, look, you do have the final say. And having done this a number of times, you are going to get some goofy stuff. But you're also going to get some valuable things that you never thought of. Sometimes you get some things that you don't quite understand at first. For instance, I did the exercise with one client, and somebody came up with sleep and eat better. Well, that's not really a service standard, but what we discovered is what they were really looking for is more of a wellness program, in the organization. But if you have these service standards created by the foundation of the org chart, and then it goes to management, then you can sift and match some of the concepts and ideas that the front lines have put out together. And then it's management's job to mold that into one service standard list. And then they can go to their group in a management team meeting or an all-staff meeting and say, here are the service standards we created together as an organization. All we did in management was wordsmith the ideas that you came up with. These are your ideas. So therefore, if you're not following the service standards, you're not going against what we're saying. You're going against what all of your peers are saying. And then you have some buy-in.
Absolutely. And I've got two things that I'm taking away from this. One, it's interesting that you use the word timeliness, because I actually use timeliness as a portion of one of my values in my business. But I define it very differently than most people, because as you were describing it, you're saying like, we're at the workstation no later than 15 minutes. Like that's where we're at this time. It's set at that time. When I talk about timeliness, I typically say it's about spending the right amount of time with the right person at the right time, which is a very different conversation, because that could mean that it's not getting there at 5 o'clock and leaving at 6 o'clock. That could mean that I get there at 5 o'clock and I end up taking off at 6:30. because 30 minutes right then at the end is what is needed right then, right there.
Right.
And if you have that miscommunication, right, the difference of expectations, it could change everything right there.
Yep, I completely agree.
And the other great thing is a lot of what this is touching into is part of Napoleon Hill's work. I think Napoleon Hill is great. There are some people that we're going to hear from during this conference who would definitely disagree with me. They're going to laugh when they hear that. But one of Napoleon Hill's great concepts, I think, is called the mastermind principle. And the whole thing behind the mastermind principle is that I have what's within my mind and it's limited, and you have what's within your mind and it's limited. However, when we come together, we're able to create what Napoleon Hill called the mastermind. It's this almost third mind where it's concepts that neither of us could have created on our own. And that's what happens when you get the buy-in, when you reach down to every level of your business, when you reach out to the different parts of your teams in order to get their input, because they're all going to bring in different perspectives that are completely different from your own.
Yes. No, you're very correct. I do like Napoleon Hill. I'm not one of those guys that says, no, I don't like him. I happen to be more of a Stephen Covey fan, who also has some great concepts. And I always go back to seek to understand rather than be understood. And I think that
Funny story about that.
Please,
real quick. So that concept of seek first to understand and then be understood actually wasn't Stephen Covey's. I know everyone in the personal development world says it's Stephen Covey's.
I heard he stole a lot of stuff, but he put it all together. I heard that before.
Yeah, which I mean, his work is absolutely phenomenal. I don't argue with any part of it, but that actual concept comes from a prayer created by someone in World War II to Saint Francis of Assisi. I just always think that's really funny. So that concept actually didn't originally come from Stephen Covey, but I think that's a hilarious thing that everyone always attributes it to him.
Yeah, in fact, the whole time management concept that he came up with, I heard, wasn't his either, but with the quadrant 1 and 2 and everything else.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's great. But I am definitely happy that he put it all together.
Yes. Yes, he put it in a framework where we could kind of understand. And yeah, not that I'm Stephen Covey, but that's exactly what I try to do with brand culture strategy and bringing that together. And as we're talking about, I think service standards, if nothing else, is the linchpin to that B plus C plus S concept.
Definitely. So, and going back into everything, talking about culture, how is it that you utilize the service standards to create the workplace culture?
I get that a lot. In fact, a client I actually worked with, and we created service standards and a number of the other B plus C plus S elements, asked me in a meeting, it's like, well, how do we make this happen? How do we actually move the needle with our people? And I said, you already know the answer. And he's like, well, what? And I says, come on, we've been working together for a while. What's the answer? He says, service standards. I'm like, yes. Now that you actually have them and you've done a great job of stepping back and allowing the base of your org chart to create them, you've honed them, you've introduced them. Now comes the hard part, but the part that works, which is you have to adhere to the standards. Number one, management has to adhere to the standards, because if they're not, nobody else is going to follow them. You have to put them up on the wall. And then I encourage them to do one of a couple of things. One, at the very least, create a committee. It's about not just about engagement, it's about involvement. Create a committee, a service standard committee, and say, all right, how are we going to catch people doing things right with these service standards? Do we create, some type of point system where peers could say, hey, you know what? You were at your desk 20 minutes ahead of time. We appreciate that. Or we saw you as we talk about our service standards. getting back to somebody and solving a problem within 24 hours. Hey, here's some points. I had another client, they do a marketing program with gnomes. Don't ask me why, but they do a marketing program with gnomes, and they internalized it as well. When they find somebody doing things right with a service standard, they've got a gnome that they painted gold, and they get the golden gnome on their desk. Something, that makes sure that every day that peers can recognize other peers that, hey, you're following these. To take it even one more step further, and I've seen this in my career when I was an executive, I encourage my clients to do this as well, is when it comes to appraisals. A lot of time when we do reviews, we talk about the responsibility of the job and goals, but I also encourage them to include ratings on how well they follow the service standard. Then it has teeth. Then it has, hey, this is something I'm going to be rated on. So, even though I'm not a morning person, darn it, I'm getting there at least 18 minutes early to go back to the original example, or to go back to respect. I'm going to make sure that I listen to people, I don't interrupt them, and so forth. And then one other thing that I suggest, I understand that sometimes with appraisals and so forth, that gets into a real sticky situation for some businesses. But even if you don't want to do that, I encourage management to do one-on-ones with their people at least once a month. I would encourage them to do once a week. When I was an executive, I did that. I found a lot of value in that. But when you're doing those one-on-ones, use the service standards to point out things that people are doing right, to point out and say, you know what? You had a project, you had a deadline, and you not only met it, you got it done early. And our service standard here is we meet deadlines. So I just want to give you kudos for not just meeting it, but getting it done early. And also because, I do understand that, as much as we would like to think that every employee listens and does things right all the time, sometimes they mess up. And I think that if you have service standards and you're using them properly and adhering to them, it makes management's job a little bit easier than to talk about something that didn't go right in some esoteric way, but to point specifically to the service standard. Using the deadline idea again. We didn't meet the deadline. It was 48 hours late. We can't do that here. And on top of that, you didn't communicate with your team members that it was going to be late and ask for help. That's not how we do things here. We have a clear service standard that we meet deadlines at ABC Company. And, instead of an employee going, well, but I did this and this happened, like, you don't even have to get mad as a mentor, supervisor, manager. You just point to the service standards. Everybody created these. I didn't create these. I think they're good. This is what makes our culture and our brand different here at ABC. I hear you, but this is the standard. It is what it is. If you don't follow it again, you're going to be written up and so forth. It makes it more of a, hey, it just is what it is, rather than an argument or a conversation that has to go more than 5 minutes of people making excuses as to why they didn't do something.
Exactly. It allows it to not be personal.
Yes.
Right? This is
exactly.
business, and there are certain things we have to accomplish within business. And that's one thing that a lot of leaders fear, is what is going to be the repercussion if I hold somebody accountable? Are they going to get angry at me? Are they going to start a riot if I do this? Is there going to be is all business going to shut down because I told this one person how I felt like they should have done things? And it allows them to say no, it's not, this isn't a personal attack. I think you're still a great person. Yeah. However, there are these guidelines that we have, these service standards that we have that we've all agreed to, and we have to be living up to them. And in this scenario, it just wasn't lived up to.
Yeah, another quick example and a shout out to my dad, who was a great teacher, a high school teacher for well over 40 years. Before I even knew what the heck a service standard was, I went to the high school that my dad taught, and it amazed me, while some teachers just couldn't control a class, his classes, people were listening, nobody was messing around. And I asked him one time, how do you do that? And he said, you know what, you set down the rules from the very first class and you adhere to them. And so he gave me an example. A kid comes in the class 5 minutes late and he gives them the tardy slip. And, of course, Mr. Bader, I this happened, that happened, somebody ate my dog, whatever, all these excuses. And my dad would just say, you know the rules, we can still be friends. I'm not mad at you, but you came 5 minutes late. Here's your tardy slip. I'm not angry with you. It just is what it is.
Exactly. And in this whole example that you've been giving, one of the other things that I really loved that I think is missing in a lot of leadership is you give them the service standards, not just to say like, oh, you missed the mark here, but also to look for examples of when it goes right. Because so often we're so focused on all the negative aspects. We're like, this went wrong and this went wrong. And why didn't you do this? And why didn't that get done? And everyone gets dragged down because it's this repetitive circle of negativity. And so what you look for, you end up finding. And so you look for more negativity, you end up finding more negativity. However, if you set the service standards up well, you have examples of great things to be looking for where things go correctly. And it allows you to say, hey, I saw that you lived up to the service standard right there. That was awesome. Keep that up. Thank you for doing that.
Well, and it gives you an opportunity to catch things right in the middle of it happening while their peers are around, which is a really positive thing for the culture. What I also notice is either right away or eventually, 4 out of 5 times you're catching people adhering to the service standard rather than that 1 out of 5 or 6 times where they're doing something wrong. And if you do it right, you really adhere to it. And I truly believe this. Maybe I'm naive, but I think that most employees want to do well. I think they want some structure. And this creates some positive structure where peers could say, look, you're just not following the service standards. Because how many incidents do you have in some businesses where you have 2 or 3 people that are really busting their behind and doing good work, and you have that 1 or 2 people that, what service standards do is it allows peers to bring those other people into the fold of doing things right. Or management sees it so clearly that they're not following it and they don't want to discourage the people that are following them. They could take action on the people that just won't come along for the ride properly.
Definitely. And I could also see this being used in another way when you do have someone who's not living up to that service standard. What you can do is, because you know what the good things are that person does, you can also go into the conversation with them and say like, hey, in this scenario right here, this didn't live up to the service standard. That didn't live up to the service standard. And I know that's not your norm. I've got this example where you've lived up to the service standard, and I've seen that standard where you've lived up to it. And that is awesome. And I want to see more of that. This wasn't one of those times, but I know that you can live up to it. So I want to see you live up to it more.
Yeah, I think that's 100% spot on point, Cody. This is slightly off subject, but it still goes back to the service standards in terms of being a foundation. I can remember a story. I had a salesperson working for me like 20 years ago. And to go back to Stephen Covey, he had a lot of points in my emotional bank account because he kept achieving and doing a lot of things and adhering to the service standards. And then for about a week or 2, he went off the rails. And, when you see somebody that, was following the program, and then all of a sudden, isn't adhering to service standards, as not just a manager, but as an elite leader, as a mentor, something should click in your head. It's like, something isn't right here. This isn't a new employee that maybe we just made a mistake on. This has been a successful part of our person that's been a part of our team that all of a sudden is going off the rails. And I called him in. I said, what? Something isn't right here. So, talk to me. I saw this, I saw that, and that's just not you, as you mentioned, Cody. What's going on? And it turned out that he found out that his wife was cheating on him with his best friend, and I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. And we sat there in a one-on-one that was scheduled for an hour. We sat there for an hour and a half, and I just listened. And I said, I hear you. And it took about a month for him to work through that. I even had a CEO that wasn't an elite leader that wanted me to fire him. And I said, look, give me some time. We'll make sure we work this out. And about a month later, he was clicking again. He just had to work through what he had to work through. But to your point, when you have something like service standards, when you have something that you're looking for in terms of performance, and all of a sudden what was a high performer all of a sudden isn't, you can go back to a tool or something to point out and say, this isn't quite right.
Absolutely. And what I love about that story is there are so many people in leadership positions, and I wouldn't call them elite leaders. I wouldn't call them legendary leaders. They're people who've been put into a position, whether it's because they did good work before or because, they just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and they didn't get training like this, who would have seen that employee and they would have written him off like, wow, he's gone down. It's kind of over for him. Let's get rid of him. Right. However, by taking the time to stand there and recognize why it was off, and knowing that there's usually so much right, that there's something not clicking right now, you've given this employee an opportunity to be human. Because we're all human. And most leaders don't do that effectively. And when you allow someone to be human and you allow them to overcome the challenges they become so dedicated to you, because they know that you actually care and that you're not just going to write them off. And then, if you did write him off, that could have caused so much more chaos in his life. Because then he wouldn't have been in work. Now he would have been without a job, and he would have had his wife and best wife cheating on him with his best friend. So now you have two negatives, and you have just, it may not have been your intention as the leader, but you have just caused more trouble for this person in their life that would take them even longer to recoup from. And it could be dramatically difficult, but you took the time to say, no. I know this guy. I know that he can do better. I'm going to stand here for him. That is what elite leadership looks like. Being able to stand up and know what is the right thing to do, to stand up for the values, to be able to point out the service standards, both right and wrong, and guide them back towards what is they're capable of becoming. Phenomenal.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I've had a couple of incidents like that, and I'm not perfect, by the way. What's funny is most
we're human.
Most of the time, when I was in management, almost all of my employees loved working for me. I had the problem on the top. I always ran into the non-elite leaders, the non-legendary leaders that, I wasn't emotionally mature enough to try to engage them and just tell them that what they were doing wrong. So that's probably why I'm doing stuff on my own now. But I will tell you, going back to that story, I had an employee, once he started rolling again, that would pretty much run through a wall for me. We had a few months later, we had a huge project. It was a big problem. And I said, I just need you to get this done, and I need this to be finished. Yeah, I need your help on this. And I know he didn't want to do it. I know that was going to be a burden on him, but I'll tell you, all I got was a no problem, boss. This will be done. And sure enough, it was. And that's the type of relationship. That's the type of productivity. People think some of this stuff is soft. That wasn't soft at all. That was productivity that led into profits because we got that done, and then we could focus on selling. So that was a pure example of how mentoring and treating people like people, goes to productivity and also the bottom line.
Definitely. And it also shows how service standards allows that to happen, which is absolutely beautiful. Now, we've talked about culture a lot, building that team there. How is service standards effective in building a brand, though? Because that's one of the other things you've said, is that you can create a brand based on the service standards. So how does that work?
Sure. Well, first off, a brand is your image. It's not a logo. It's what people think about you and feel about your business when they interact with you. So on the very basic level, it builds your brand because, as I like to say, you're branding an experience. As some clients even are so bold as to put the service standards on the wall, right in the lobby or the store or the restaurant, and or their website, so it's there for everybody to see, so the customer, member, or client knows exactly what to expect. Now once it's there, you're creating a branded experience, not only because there's the expectation, but because if you've done things right, like we've talked about, and you're adhering to them, you're reinforcing them, people are going to get the same experience over and over, and it's going to be a positive one. That in and of itself builds your brand, especially from the valuable word of mouth marketing that we like to talk about. Going even further, for some organizations, they will actually use the service standards in some brand messaging. And I'll give you an example. The place that I actually learned service standards was a $4 billion financial institution outside of Chicago. And we were basically a banker's bank. We served other financial institutions. And we had never done any real advertising in the past, but found that we needed to as we were going into new markets and new areas. And so we decided to do ads in trade publications. And so we thought a lot about, what do we want to say? What do we want to do? And the ad firm kind of took us down a little road, and it came out that, hey, you know what? When we say in a service standard that we're going to answer the phone within two rings, we answer the darn phone within 2 rings. And so the ad firm kind of thought about it. I says, you know what? That's a campaign in itself. So we had ads with a big 2 on it that said, you will not be listening to rings all day long. When you call us, you're going to get a person or at least a message within 2 rings of how we're going to be able to take care of you and so forth. We even had a 24, because I think I mentioned it before, that we resolve problems within 24 hours. And it said, when you have a problem with us, we will resolve it within 24 hours. If we can't resolve it within 24 hours, we will be calling you, telling you what the timeline is and what we're doing to make your experience good today, even though we still have this issue. I'm paraphrasing a little bit with the ads, but that's an example. If you're really living the service standards and you're branding an experience, then why should you be shy about putting that out there on social media, on your website, actually saying that this is what we do here? Because then that creates an even higher expectation for the team that's providing that, and it sets an expectations for those that you serve that make them want to keep coming back if they keep getting that branded experience.
Definitely. It all revolves around integrity, right? What I say is what I do. And when you live, like, integrity is sadly a very scarce thing that we have in the world right now. There are a lot of people who don't live in integrity. And sometimes it's not on purpose. It's just that, certain situations come up. They haven't defined their service standards, right? Mm-hmm. And so they just live outside of this integrity, and they're just trying to do what they can do. A lot of times it's not even intentionally like, I'm going to tell them this and I'm going to be that jerk off that, trying to ruin people's lives. Like, most of the time people aren't like that, right? But like you can so easily fall out of integrity. But when you know what the service standards are, when you know what it is that you're trying to attain, when you're actually living it day in and day out, you can confidently tell people this is what we do and be completely integrous to it.
Yep. Yeah, and as we've talked about before, it becomes a matter of fact. This is how we provide service. This is how we do things here. And I think it gives employees comfort because they know exactly what's expected of them. Things don't change, every day, every week. And I think, one of the things that we hadn't talked about yet is I think that it creates some comfort for new employees. Somebody comes onto the job and, there's always some nervousness of how do I fit in? How do I do this? Well, you know what? Here are the service standards. If you adhere to these, you're gonna be on your way to fitting in with the team.
Absolutely. That reminds me of the first job I had going into the corporate world. I got to the job, and basically there were two people on my team who were fairly inexperienced in what it was we were doing. The IT department wasn't able to get me set up on anything, and like there was no training for me. So like my first day, they're like, we printed out some pieces of paper for you. Here they are. These are people you need to contact. Go contact them. Yeah. Like that was like legitimate, like no joke, legitimately my full training. And when you come into the situation like that, you're just like, I am so lost. I don't know what to do. It's just like, am I at the right place? Am I even good enough? And when you set up the service standards and you're living by them, you can prevent that from happening to people. And that level of comfort is so nice to come into an organization with, because without it, it can be total chaos. Both the work you do and just like the environment around you, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I trying to do? And you don't know, right? But when you live those service standards, you can create it, this stable thing. So someone can walk in and be like, oh, I understand this. This makes sense to me.
Yeah, I work with a lot of service-based businesses, and service is people say good service. It's become so ubiquitous. And if you have service standards, especially let's take an example of a restaurant or a fast food place. If you have service standards and they're on the wall, you walk in and you're like, okay, I could do that. It becomes very straightforward as to what's expected of you.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the other things you were talking about within the brand and the marketing portion of it was that when people see that, they get the expectation that that's what it is. And then when you live it, they can say, oh, it actually is that. Mm-hmm. And when you're able to say it actually is that, you can go to work and be confident and happy about it. And you can go out into the world and be like, yeah, if I would have been in any other job, this is what would have happened to me today. However, we've got these great service standards that allowed me to come out of the situation completely different. And on the other hand, if you don't define those service standards well, and you have them or you do define them and you don't live up to them, people tend to go to work with wrong expectations.
Yes.
And then they're like, oh, this is awful. I went into work today and I just got yelled at all day, and they don't appreciate any of the good work I do. And these guys are awful. And I'm going to go on to Glassdoor and write all the terrible things that I can think of. And, I like, when I see someone and they're like looking for a job, I'm going to tell them, don't come here. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you have something like service standards, and they don't always have to be elaborate. I've seen some organizations where they just have 4 or 5 very, very key service standards. Others may have 12 or 15, whatever is right for your culture and so forth. But, you see some of these darn shows, like Kitchen Nightmares or The Prophet and so forth. And you see these business owners and managers yelling at your employees. And I sit there and I watch these and I'm like, well, you're yelling about the same thing. Instead of being very clear as to, we put water on the table right when the customer comes in. Well, if that was written down, you wouldn't have to yell about it all the time. You would just be able to say, hey, look over here. We put water on the table when the customer walks in. Same. I work with a lot of banks and credit unions. I see yelling sometimes when I walk in at first with these clients, and in the back rooms, I'm like, well, you know what? If you have a service standard that says, we'll greet the customer or member when they walk through the door, and you adhere to that, there doesn't need to be yelling about, hey, how come you're not talking to the customer when they walk in the door? How come you're not doing the greeting? There doesn't need to be that anger and that frustration emotion. It's just, it just is what it is, and allows you to treat other people like professionals and not like dogs. You're telling them, sit, roll over,
play dead. No.
Yeah. I've seen some employees do that too.
Oh my gosh. The other thing within that, like, if I'm the customer walking into the place of business and the first thing I see is somebody getting yelled at, what does that tell me about this place? I know myself, the first thing that's going to go through my mind is this actually a good place that I'm coming into? Do I want to do business here? Do I want them to do services for me? Do I actually want their product? I don't know. It seems like something's wrong here.
It creates bad feelings right from the start. You're still branding the experience, but you're branding the experience in the wrong way. I mean, it's like being, sitting at Thanksgiving with a bunch of family and 2 family members arguing. Nobody wants to be around that. That's not fun.
Exactly. And I think we've all been there where the one family member is mad at the other family member, and they both want you to be on their side, and you're just kind of like, well, I don't want to make either of you mad because
I'm Switzerland.
I'm Switzerland. Peace. Oh yeah. So what other ways that we haven't gone into can we utilize service standards to be beneficial to us as elite leaders?
I'll go back to the one-on-ones. I think that if we have the service standards, we can really use that as a tool to be elite leaders and to go from management to mentor. I think it provides a great framework for us to have a clear professional conversation and make a human connection. I think that's one thing that is true elite leadership is making a human connection and not just treating people like employees, but treating them like people. It may seem like a very esoteric phrase, but I think that, by using a foundation and using it as a tool like the service standards, we're able to make that human connection without any emotion, and also be able to use an outline or a framework as a mentor to help them to do better. To be able to say, all right, well, let's go back to the deadline example, because for some businesses, that's a very important thing. If we're not meeting deadlines internally, we're creating a domino effect for other departments. If we're not making deadlines externally with clients and customers, we're setting a below expectations brand experience. So a very important thing to do. So if we're truly thinking of mentoring and not just management, and say, hey, you didn't meet the deadline, you're written up, but saying, all right, consistently we're not meeting this. And maybe there's a write-up anyway, but how do we get beyond this? What from your perspective is keeping you from meeting or exceeding this service standard? Is it because you don't understand? Is it because you don't have the skills? Is it because you don't have the help? Because it's not about you. It's about adhering to this standard of meeting the deadline 100% of the time. So we need to figure out what we need to help you with. Maybe it's training. Maybe we need to pair you with somebody else. And this is something, frankly, that I don't think enough businesses do, especially medium to large businesses. Or, maybe you're a good guy or a good gal, but this just isn't the job for you. Using the Collins phrase, you're on the right bus, but this might not be the seat. So let's talk about, dig in what's really happening here that's keeping you from meeting or exceeding the standard. Because if it's something that just isn't your expertise or skill, maybe there's another area where we can use you in this organization where you are going to be able to excel not only at adhering to the service standards, but the responsibility of the job, and you could be successful in what we're trying to accomplish here.
Absolutely. What I love about that is you're not just using the service standards as law.
Mm-hmm.
You're using it as a base for development. And that is one of the largest things people are looking for in today's world. Because, quite frankly, most people don't receive real life development in most areas of life. I know I went through the entire educational system through a degree, and I did not get most of what I needed to be successful in the real world. Sadly, it's very sad. Most of that came from my own research after I got out of college. And while I was in the midst of needing this information, right? And you're using this not just to say, hey, this is where you went right, and hey, this is where you went wrong, but you're saying, hey, I see something isn't right. How do we make it right? How do we allow you to become a better person?
Right.
So many people are seeking that in the world because there's just not enough of it. There's so much downward on them.
Completely agree. What's interesting in what you just said, I went through a whole MBA program. I also afterwards went through a certification program in integrated marketing. And I will tell you, my whole brand culture strategy concept, that's the basis of my book and the basis of my client engagements and presentations, at least 80%, I would say 90%, is from what I learned in interacting in corporate life with clients, from books, from seminars I went. I would say at best 10% of what is come to be brand culture strategy alignment in my mind came from my formal education. And that's not to bash formal education. I think one of the things that formal education does, and I've heard this from professors, is it teaches you how to learn so that after you leave, you could put all this stuff together. But most of your learning that you're actually going to be able to apply, I think, comes from your experiences rather than necessarily in the classroom, although that's valuable as well.
Definitely. And it's interesting how you said that, because I think a lot of people in leadership positions are expecting whoever's coming out of these different universities and whatever else, whatever certifications they get, to be masters around whatever topic, right? And so their expectation is already, oh, they went through that schooling, they should already be here. But that's not what the education actually set them up for. And so as the leader, your expectation's up here, when in reality, your expectation should be here for that person because they haven't had the real world experience.
Right.
And they still need it. And you can be the catalyst that allows them to become everything they have the potential to be. But you need to be that catalyst for them, because if you're not, as the leader in front of them right now, the likelihood of them getting it from another leader is less than likely, and on their own is possible but very difficult when you don't know where you need to be going anyways.
Right. Yeah, I think that, that's where, I've talked about mentoring a little bit. Again, this is a little off the service standard subject, but some of the organizations that I've seen have done an amazing job with mentoring, actually formally creating mentoring programs, because for some, you are going to learn a lot from your direct supervisor, manager, whoever you report to. Yeah, in other places, sometimes as we said before, you may be a leader, but you may not have the capacity. Maybe you're not the right connection for that employee. Doesn't mean you need to shift them off to another department. But if you're big enough to have a mentoring program and allow that person, with raw talent to learn from some other leaders in the organization, they may get some of that training, get some of that knowledge, and may find that that they do need to be on another seat, or that they do have another career path within that organization, even though it may not be in that department or with that first leader that they work with.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because another major challenge that's going on in a lot of business right now is that the average lifespan of an employee, right, the length that they'll be with a company has dropped down to like 2 years that you'll be with one company, which means you have basically a revolving door within your business of employees all the time.
Which is expensive.
And it's expensive as heck, because to train them, to develop them, to give them the time to actually learn the skills they need to learn, and searching for enough individuals to continually fill that position, it's a major challenge. I mean, there are businesses that are dedicated to just getting people into your door, not even necessarily qualifying them very well, just getting them into your door. And like, can your team thrive when it's changing dramatically all the time? And I would venture to say, no, you can't thrive when you have to replace someone every couple months, because you haven't created a solid team that is able to drive the results that are needed to make your business, your team, your organization legendary. And so for you need to be able to figure out, how do I keep people there? That's also essential to elite leadership, is how do I keep the people here? How do I make sure that they want to stay here? How do we make it so that they don't die out at 2 years, that they stay here for 5, 10 years, so that we can actually achieve the vision that we have for this business? And service standards really create that base that allow people to feel comfortable and want to stay with the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It sets expectations. And I truly believe that it creates a comfort level, among the team. Especially, if management is adhering to it and reinforcing it, then you don't have those, bad apples as much. Sometimes you hire one, but if you're doing things right with the service standards, the peers will shout out and say, look at this one person that isn't following. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to show them the door or her the door, but it does mean that you need to bring them back into the fold and go back to the service standards and use that as a training and mentoring tool.
Absolutely. And going along this the same topic, I just lost my train of thought. Don't you love when that happens?
Well, you know what? I ended up breaking away because my internet didn't work. So so losing your train of thought, that's no big deal. You're still on with us, Cody.
Yeah. Oh, sheesh. It was really good too, what I was thinking.
I'm sure it
Come
was.
back to me. I don't know.
Well,
So one question that I would ask, the
Sure.
topic of today's entire session is elite leadership. This whole day is dedicated to elite leadership. How would you define elite leadership?
Yeah, the short answer is creating involvement. The longer answer is I'll dig into what I mean by that. Is I think that we confuse three things. We confuse communication, engagement, and involvement. I think back years ago, the whole mantra was communication. Let's not keep people in the dark. Let's let them know, what's going on. Let's share our corporate goals and our balance sheet and income statement and other metrics with our entire organization chart. And that's great. It's a great start because people know what's going on. But it doesn't necessarily, as I say, create an environment where employees actually want to come to work. It's like a child being told, hey, we're gonna be leaving at 6 a.m. tomorrow for vacation. All right, well, that's communication. I know we're leaving at 6 a.m. I know I got to get up early. It doesn't mean that I'm a part of the decision or have to like what's going on, but I know what's happening. So as one CEO who came to me who was almost distraught, he says, I communicate with my employees all the time. We have meetings, we have the employee newsletter, we let them know what's happening with our goals and everything else. But, I get no excitement, no passion, no motivation. How do I create that? And I said, well, how do you involve your people in the not only the achievement of goals, but even the creation of initiatives and projects? And I heard silence. And he didn't understand what I was saying. And so I went back to, okay, you're doing an awesome job of communicating. That's the base level. The next level is engagement of, well, what do you think? What do you think about these goals? What do you think about this project or process? Getting some feedback. Okay, that's the next level. But then the highest level, in my opinion, which is an example of elite leadership, is involvement of, what do you think we should be doing? Where do you see the opportunity? All right, you see that there's an issue in the department. How about you create the process? I'll give you the resources. You pick your team. You'll get paid for it. You set up the meetings. You do the rapid process improvement or whatever tool you want to use, but you lead the team and you come back to me and let me know how we can improve this process. Here's your budget. Here's your resources. That's involvement. That's what makes people want to stay, not just 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, because they feel like they're part of creating something. We mentioned Covey, we mentioned Napoleon Hill, and a couple others. There's another gentleman who escapes me. He wrote the book Leadership Matters, and I apologize, I forget the name, but the book is called Leadership Matters. And one of the things he says in there, people support what they help to create. That's involvement. And I think that's the pinnacle of elite leadership. If you're not doing everything as a leader, but you're encouraging and giving the resources and the bandwidth for other people to be involved and create. That to me is the epitome of elite leadership.
Absolutely. It's going from creating employees to the next generation of
Hmm.
leaders. That's what it's all about. I love that. Absolutely phenomenal. And that is basically the end of our first hour of
Darn.
the Legendary Leadership Summit. I know. I could go on for days and days and days about this. In
Me too.
fact, I am going on days and days and days about this, but I have 14 other people to be talking with this the next couple of days, all
Absolutely.
who are bringing amazing topics to talk about, amazing things and experiences to bring into the conversation. So Kenneth, Ken, you have been phenomenal, and service standards is so important. If people are trying to get a hold of you, what are some of the best ways?
Yeah, the best way is I'm great with email. You can just email me at kbater. It's Bator, just like Gator. Kbater at btcinc.net. And I always answer emails unless it's spam. So happy to help there. As I mentioned, I have an article on service standards and how to create them. Happy to share it with anybody. My website is www.btcinc.net. There's a contact form there and a lot of good content. And I'm on all social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that fun stuff. As I joke with my wife often, if somebody can't find me, you're not trying very hard.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ken. And tell us tell the audience what is your the offer that you have in your free gift.
Terrific. Well, the free gift is a white paper that coincides with my book. The book is The Formula for Business Success Equals B plus C plus S. And the white paper, which is completely free, is titled When Your Formula Doesn't Add Up. And it's a really neat tool which goes through, if your branding isn't quite right, here are 3 tips to improve it right now. If your culture isn't quite right, here are 3 tips that you can do right now. I'm gonna clue you in. One of them is service standards. Go figure. If your strategy isn't being implemented or executed, here are 3 things that you can do right now. It gives you tips that you can implement right away. And then also, real quick, one offer that I always make is I do a B plus C plus S audit, which is a kind of a deeper look than a brand audit. We get into culture and strategy, and you get an hour via video like this with me. There's no commitment afterwards, but I find that I get a lot of clients from that. It's normally $4.99. For anybody hearing this that emails me or contacts me in some way, I will do it for $3.99, and it's very valuable, especially if you're going into strategic planning or anything of that nature.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ken. This
My
has been
pleasure.
no, it's my pleasure to have you here with us today. Absolutely phenomenal. What if you had one thing to leave with everybody for the day? What would that one thing be?
Other than create service standards, you look for involvement. Other than the service standards, I think that one of the most valuable tools, which costs you nothing but time, is scheduling those one-on-ones with people that directly report to you and your team. I found that to be incredibly valuable in my corporate career. And that's definitely one suggestion that I would leave you with, and it helps you to create that involvement. But just in a close, great job, Cody, for bringing this out to people. I think the idea of not just leadership, but legendary leadership, shooting for the stars, elite leadership is exactly what we need today. I look forward to hearing from the other 14 thought leaders thank you for offering this to people. I think that it's a perfect subject for today.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I'm touched that you said that. Thank you so much.